Culture Counts by Serena, Nanda, and Richard L. Worms. Chapter 9. Marriage, Family, and Kinship. A Society Without Marriage, the NA of China. In the 1950s, Frank Sinatra sang, "Love and marriage go together like horse and carriage." But not all is true in all cultures. Among the Na and the other cultures of southwest China, the culturally native institution that joins men and women in sexual and reproductive partnership is called cita. Except historically among the elites, the Na do not practice marriage and do not even have a word for it. In the cita relationship, a man passes the night in a lover's household and returns to his own family in the morning. All sexual and potentially reproductive activity takes place during this concealed visit of the Na male to the house of a woman who has agreed beforehand to lie with him. As lovers, their relationship involves affection, respect, and intimacy, but does not include the notions of fidelity, permanence, or parental responsibility for the children. There is no coercion in the relationship. Either party may offer, accept, or decline an invitation for a visit. To spare the other's feelings, one might say, "Tonight is not possible. I already have one for the night." And a woman may even turn away an invited lover at the door if she chooses. But although either the woman or the man may initiate the visit, it is always a man who comes secretly to the woman's household. Concealment is necessary because the Na taboo, forbidding a household's male members to hear or see any sexual talk or activities involving household females. Males will never answer the door after dark lest they encounter a woman's lover, and the lover himself makes every effort to avoid detection, often bringing food to prevent the guard dog's barking, speaking in only whispers during intercourse, and leaving quietly after daybreak. Both men and women have multiple partners, serially or simultaneously, and no records are kept except visits to ascertain the parentage of the children. The Na do not have a word for incest, illegitimate child, infidelity, or promiscuity. The Na are matrilineal, and the women, by a variety of fathers, stay with the mother's household for their entire lives. When a generation lacks females, a household may adopt a relative's child or encourage a son to bring his lover into the household. The only males in the Na household are relatives of different generations, who are brothers, uncles, and granduncles. There are no husbands or fathers. Where males are short in supply in the family, a woman may bring in her lover home. The Na visit, which has been part of the Na culture for more than 1,000 years, is treated as mutually enjoyable but singular occurrence that entails no future conditions. The Chinese state has periodically tried to change what they call this barbarous practice without success so far. But as the Na adapt to the conditions of the nation-state and the globalizing economy, they are increasingly subjected to the state-sponsored public school education and media, which reflect mainstream Han mores and lifestyles that stigmatize Na practices. This, as well as their inability to name a father on official documents, may spell the end of Na visits. At the same time, however, the Na culture has attracted tourists, whose presence has benefited the Na economy, which has given them an impetus to retain the system that distinguishes them from the larger Chinese culture. Forms and functions of marriage. All human societies face certain problems for which marriage, the creation of families, and kinship systems offer solutions. Every society must regulate sexual access between males and females, find satisfactory ways to organize labor, assign responsibility for childcare, provide a clear framework for organizing an individual rights and responsibilities, and to provide for the transfer of property and social position between generations. Many human solutions to these challenges are guided by cultural rules, accounting for a wide variety of kinship and family systems. These systems tend to be adaptive to subsistence patterns and other realities. When these change, rules about kinship and family also tend to change. The need to regulate sexual access stems from the potentially continuous receptivity of human males and females to sexual activity. If sexual competition was not regulated and channeled into stable relationships that were given social approval, it could cause societal conflict. These relationships need not be permanent. However, in most societies, though not all, they are relatively stable. We refer to these relationships as marriage. Marriage, which refers to the customs, rules, and obligations that establish a socially endorsed relationship between adults and children and between the married couple's kin groups, is a very widespread, though not a universal social institution, as the Knot illustrate. But in the absence of safe and dependable contraception throughout most of human history, and with the near certainty that children would be born, marriage as a relatively stable union between a male and female that involves responsibility for children as well as economic exchange became the basis for most human adaptations. In addition to forming bonds between a couple, marriage extends social alliances by linking together different families and kin groups, leading to cooperation among groups of people related to the married couple. This expansion of social group within which people can work together and share resources is a great advantage for the survival of the human species. Although marriage and the subsequent formation of families in most societies rests on the biological complementary of males and females in reproduction, both marriage and family are cultural patterns. Thus they differ in form and function both among and within human societies and change over time with changing political and economic circumstances and the life stages of individuals. Heterosexual monogamous marriage, dominant in the United States, is only one of many culturally acceptable kinds of marriages worldwide. Marriages involving plural spouses or same-sex relations also fulfill the functions of marriage in satisfactory ways. This cultural variation makes it difficult to give one universality applicable definition of marriage. Among some African societies, women-women marriage is an alternative to heterosexual marriages. This allows barren women to divorce her husband, take another woman as her wife, and arrange for a surrogate to impregnate this woman. Children born from this arrangement become members of the barren woman's natal line and refer to her as their father. A similar pattern is found among the Azaid of East Africa, where royal power is sustained by multiple wives. Where there is a shortage of marriageable women, a man may take a young man for his wife, and the couple would be recognized as a married couple. Like marriage, the concept of family also varies among cultures. In many societies, the most important family bond is between lineal blood relations, or between brothers and sisters, rather than between husband and wife. In these societies, the lineage or clan, rather than the immediate family, confers legitimacy on children. Marriage rules. Every society has culturally defined rules concerning sexual relations in marriage. These rules may determine how spouses are chosen, limit marriage to certain groups, dictate the number of spouses and how they are chosen, allow for dissolving marriages, determine rules for remarriage, and specify the kinds of exchanges and rituals that legitimate marriage, and determine the rights and obligations established by marriage. Among the most universal rules is the incest taboo. Incest taboos. Incest taboos are rules that prohibit sexual relations with specific categories of kin. Incest taboos are universal, though they apply to different categories of kin in different societies. Because sexual access is a key right of marriage, incest taboos restrict who are considered acceptable marriage partners. Except for brother and sister marriage in some ancient empires like Egypt, Peru, Rome, and Hawaii, it's probably to keep power and wealth within royal families. Incest taboos banning sex between parents and their children and between brothers and sisters are universal. In many societies, people beyond the immediate family, such as a lineage or clan members or certain categories of cousins, may be covered by the incest taboo. These rules demonstrate that kinship, although based on biological relationships, is in fact a cultural construct. For example, although an individual's parallel and cross cousins both stand in the same biological relationship to an individual. In some societies, the incest taboo may cover one category but not the other. Different explanations have been proposed for the universality of the incest taboo. Biologically based theories argue that the incest taboo prevents inbreeding that could have a deleterious effect on humanity. Although sex between close biological relatives does lead to increased birth defects, it is questionable whether this connection could be received in pre-modern societies, which have extremely high infant mortality rates. And as we noted, the incest taboo may apply to people who are not close biological relatives. Psychologically based theories argue either that humans have an innate aversion to those whom they are raised, or that sexual competition among siblings or parents and children could create disruption and kin role confusion in the family. However, these theories do not account for all the incest taboos and avoidance patterns in different societies. In addition, if aversion to intimate kin is innate, what is the need for a rule against it? Alliance theory argues that incest taboos force people to marry outside their group, creating wider bonds that are useful in helping these groups survive. When Margaret Mead asked a man in New Guinea if he was allowed to marry his sister, he was astonished. If a man married his sister, he replied, he would have no brother-in-law whom to hunt, to garden, or to visit. Creating a wider alliances is an extremely powerful argument for the incest taboo. Endogamy rules require people to marry within their own group, however that group is defined. As noted previously, blood relations among royalty may be encouraged or required to marry each other. In India, castes and subcastes are endogamous. In the United States, although there is no named endogamous groups, racial groups, religious groups, and other social classes tend to be endogamous based on opportunities to meet cultural norms and similarities in lifestyle. Preferential marriages. Some societies have preferential marriage rules, usually involving cousin marriage. In cross-cousin marriage, the preferred partners are the children of one's parents' siblings of the opposite sex, the mother's brother or the father's sister. Preferred cross-cousin marriage reinforces ties between kin groups established in the preceding generation, preserving the relationship between two intermarrying kin groups across generations. Parallel cousin marriage involves the children of the parents' same-sex siblings, the mother's sister or the father's brother, and is found in some Arab and North African Muslim societies. Because descent and inheritance are in the male line in Muslim Arab societies, parallel cousin marriage helps prevent the fragmentation of family property and keeps economic resources within the family. Parallel cousin marriage reinforces the solidarity of brothers, but by socially isolating groups of brothers from each other, it also adds to fractional disputes of disunity within larger societal system. This illustrates that although different kinship and family structures may contribute to solidarity and stability at one level of society, they may be socially disruptive at another level. Again, because cross-cousin and parallel cousin marriage differentiate kin who are equally biologically close, preferred cousin marriage rules demonstrate the important cultural dimension of kinship systems. The levirate and sororate are two types of marriage rules that demonstrate the importance of marriage as an alliance between two groups, rather than between two individuals. These rules allow a marriage to survive the death of one of the partners with the continuance of group alliances and the fulfillment of the marriage contract. Under the levirate, a man marries the widow of his dead brother, and in some cases, the child born to this union are considered the children of the deceased man. Thus, the levirate enables the children to remain within the dead husband's descent group. In the sororate, when a woman dies, her kin group supplies a sister as a wife for the widower. The sororate also allows the husband of the barren woman to marry her sister, or at least some of the children of this marriage are considered those of the first wife. If no qualifying relative is available to fulfill the levirate or the sororate, other appropriately classified kin may be substituted, or these marriages may not take place. Number of spouses. In all societies have rules about how many spouses a person may have at one time. Monogamy, which permits each individual to only have one spouse at any given time, is a rule in Europe and North America, but not in most world cultures. Polygamy, or plural marriage, includes polygyny, the marriage of one man to several women, and polyandry, the marriage of one woman to several men. About 75% of the world's cultures permit and prefer polygamy. But even in these cultures, the male-female ratio and the requirements of a bride price, which many men cannot afford, inhibit its actual occurrence. Polygamy. Polygamy is an important economic and political functions in some societies. Where women are economically important, polygamy increases the man's wealth and therefore his social position. Because marriage links groups together, having several wives from different groups within a society also extends a man's alliances. Thus, chiefs, headmen, and state leaders may take wives from many different groups or villages to increase their political power. Polygamy is primarily found in societies where plural wives and their children increase both a family's labor supply and its productivity. For example, among the Tiwi of Australia, a foraging group, women's food collecting makes a very important contribution to the food supply. Thus, the more wives a man has, the better his family standards of living. Although Western cultural stereotypes criticize polygamy as oppressing women, the status of females in polygamous societies is not uniformly low, and may even, as among the Tiwi, be relatively high, and accord women a high degree of sexual and economic freedom. Where a woman's work is hard and monotonous, as it often is, women may welcome the addition of a co-wife because it eases their own workload and provides daily companionship. Conflict among co-wives does occur in polygamous societies and is sometimes mitigated by a sororal polygamy, a preference for a man to marry sisters. In many polygamous societies, co-wives live in separate dwellings, and cultural norms requiring a man to distribute his economic resources and sexual attentions evenly among his wives to also mitigate family conflict. Like all other cultural patterns, marriage rules adapt to changing economic and social circumstances. Thus, with declining amounts of available agricultural land, increasing expense of educating children, and the social pressures of the Western and Christian condemnation of polygamy, this form of marriage has to some extent declined or been driven underground in parts of Africa. Polyandry is relatively rare, found mainly in Tibet, Nepal, and in some indigenous groups in India, like the Toda. In Tibet, as many other polyandrous societies, polyandry is related to a shortage of land. If brothers marry a single wife, their father's land can be kept intact within a family, rather than fragmented over the generations. Polyandry is also functional in societies where men are away from home for long periods of time, and that a woman needs more than one husband to provide for her. Among the Toda, polyandry is related to the shortage of women, because they no longer practice female infanticide, and under the influence of Christian missionaries, the Toda today are largely monogamous. Choosing a mate. In the cultural context of marriage includes how mates are chosen. In most societies, kin group interests, rather than individual desires, are bases of mate selection, and the families of the bride and groom take an important, even determinative, role in selecting their children's spouses, often through a go-between. This practice of arranged marriage strongly contrasts with marriage in the United States, where individuals ideally select their own mates on a basis of sexual compatibility, emotional needs, physical attractiveness, and personality, a cluster of patterns called romantic love. Arranged marriage is related to other cultural patterns. In India, for example, its dominance is aligned with the patrilineal, patriarchal, and patrilocal ideas of the Indian society. Even in contemporary India, where women are increasingly working outside the home, most prefer arranged marriage, although patterns are changing. Among urban middle class, the bride and groom are more likely to meet, and perhaps even outside family visits before they marry. Traditionally, potential spouses did not see each other before the wedding ceremony. Economic and cultural globalization has also had an impact. In South India, young lower-class women are working in garment factories earning salaries that are becoming essential to the family subsistence. In the past, these families paid dowries for their daughters in arranged marriages, but now many of these women save for their own dowries. This has led to the greater independence for young unmarried women, who now demand greater rights to choose their own mates, rather than accepting matches of their families arranged. These love matches have, however, disrupted the kin support networks that traditionally accompany arranged marriages and put women at greater risk for abuse and infidelity. Increasingly, women all over India, including rural India, are participating in paid work, trying to supplement the meager incomes of their families. But the income is critical, and many women are defying even their husbands in their determination to work. The exchange of goods and the rights in marriage. Almost everywhere, the public rituals and ceremonies that accompany marriage distinguish from other similar kinds of unions. Marriage involves the transfer of certain rights and obligations, primarily involving sexual access of partners to each other, rights over any children born in the marriage, obligations by one or both parents to care for children born to the union, and the rights of the marriage partners to economic services of the other. Almost universally, marriage requires an exchange of goods or services between the families of the bride and groom. Although sometimes called gifts, these exchanges are obligatory for the transfer of marital rights, and if the exchanges are not completed, the rights in marriage can be forfeited. Although certain exchanges are dominant in society, and any particular society may have several legitimate forms of exchange. Bride service and bride wealth. Bride service, bride wealth, and dowry are three kinds of marriage exchanges. In addition, other less common forms include groom service, where a potential bride spends a week or two at the groom's house to demonstrate her domestic skills. And bride service, most commonly found in foraging societies where few material goods are accumulated, the husband must work for a specified number of years for his wife's family in exchange for his marital rights. Among the Jew Huasi of the Kalahari Desert in Africa, this may be as long as 15 years, or until the birth of a third child. The most common form of marriage exchange is bride wealth, where cash or goods are given by the groom's kin to the bride's kin to seal the marriage. Bride wealth previously was called a bride price, but this falsely conveys the idea that the marriage is merely an economic exchange, and that the woman's status in other societies is devalued. In fact, in these societies, daughters are valuable to their families because of their bride wealth finances males' marriages. In societies with bride wealth, a person can claim compensation for a violation of conjugal rights only if the bride wealth has been paid. Furthermore, bride wealth paid at marriage is returned if a marriage is terminated. Although many studies of bride wealth emphasize its role in entitling a husband to domestic, economic, sexual, and reproductive rights, bride wealth also confers rights on the wife, as it allows wives to hold their husbands accountable for violations of conjugal rights. In sanctioning these mutual rights and obligations, bride wealth helps stabilize marriage by giving both families a vested interest in keeping the couple together. Although globally widespread, bride wealth transactions are particularly characteristic of Africa. Among the Kipsigis, a pastoralist horticultural society of East Africa, the traditional bride wealth payment was livestock, but now it includes cash. Formerly, when an agricultural land was available and crop prices were high, bride wealth was high because of the importance of a woman's agricultural labor. Now, however, land is scarce, crop prices are low, and women's agricultural labor has lost value, so bride wealth has declined. On the other hand, Kipsigi's parents of educated girls often demand high bride wealth as compensation for their daughters' school fees, because their daughters' education will both increase their earning potential and benefit their marital home. Dowry. Dowry, which is less widespread than bride wealth, refers to goods given by a bride's family to the groom's family and is associated with private ownership of property. Today, dowry is mainly associated with India, and although it's illegal, it remains central to arranged marriage. One explanation of India dowry is the voluntary gift, symbolizing affection for a daughter leaving home, and compensating her for her traditional exclusion from the inheritance of land or property. Dowry is also sometimes explained as a source of a married woman's security because it always includes jewelry, which is theoretically her property. Dowry is always sometimes explained as compensation to the groom's family, who must now take on an economic burden of a wife, who traditionally did not work outside the home. In contemporary India, with this new emphasis on consumerism and social class mobility, dowry is increasingly perceived by a husband's family as a way to improve their financial and social standing. As such, insufficient dowry is sometimes used as an emotional blackmail of a woman's family and is linked to wife abuse and even wife murder. Historically, dowry is also a pattern in Europe and the United States, perhaps a custom of the bride's family paying for the wedding is a survival of dowry. Using anthropology, domestic violence, and the cultural defense. Kinship relationships, especially in patriarchal cultures, are frequent contexts of violence. When the government of Kazakhstan invited anthropologist Edward Sanjar to analyze and address the high increase of domestic violence in this officially multicultural society, one female colonel from Domestic Violence Law Enforcement Unit told him, "From early childhood, Kazakh males are the bosses. It is normal for a husband to beat his wife." It may be normal, but in the United States and other societies, including Kazakhstan, it is illegal. Although some multicultural societies like Kazakhstan do consider culture in responding to domestic violence, courts in the United States do not generally recognize culture as a defense. The cultural defense of domestic violence in court has been mainly used to defend men who come from immigrant cultures where domestic violence is normal. In these cases, have sometimes even involved anthropologists as expert witnesses, testifying to violence as a culturally appropriate response to a wife who has dishonored her family through sexual transgressions. The judges have used this as mitigating circumstance and reduced the sentence. Most anthropologists have criticized this position. Along with women's groups and legal scholars, they protest that there should be only one standard of justice, which should not be affected by the defendant's cultural background. In this view, a court's decision to allow a cultural defense sends out a dangerous message that immigrant women cannot be fully protected in the U.S. law. In addition, the cultural defense distorts the anthropological concept of culture as varied and changing. Lawyers, judges, and the popular media tend to have a static and generalizing perspective on culture, which is inaccurate. Anthropology does not accept the idea that culture made me do it, but anthropology has been helpful in raising awareness in the need for culturally and linguistically sensitive responses to victims of domestic violence. Ethnographies that illuminate the diverse cultural context of domestic violence, and groups like the Saki, a charitable organization in the New York City dedicated to eradicating domestic violence among the city's families of South Asian descent, show how culturally relevant interventions make an important difference to serving victims of domestic violence in both our own and other societies. Family structures, households, and rules of residence. Two basic types of families are elementary, or nuclear. Family and extended family. Nuclear families are organized around the relationship between husband and wife. The extended family is based on consanguinity, or blood ties between relations extended over 3 or more generations. A household, or a domestic group, is different from a family. Although most households include people related by blood or marriage, non-kin may be included. Controversially, members of a family may be spread out over several households. Household composition is affected by the cultural ties about residence after marriage. Under neo-local residence rules, married couples create their own households. Under patrilocal residence rules, a newly married couple lives with the husband's family, whereas matrilocal residence rules, a couple lives with the wife's family. Under avunculocal residence rules, a couple lives with the wife's uncle's family. This rule permits the geographical concentration of male lineage mates and the preservation of male control of lineage wealth in the patrilineal system. Bilocal residence permits a couple to choose between living with the wife's family or the husband's family. Each of these residence rules is associated with a different type of kinship pattern. Nuclear families. A nuclear family, consisting of a married couple and their children, is mainly associated with neolocal households. Only 5% of the world's societies are traditionally neolocal. The nuclear neolocal family is well adapted to industrialized capitalism, where jobs are not generally dependent on a family's connections, and where employment and promotion often require geographical mobility. Independence and flexibility are also requirements in foraging societies, and nuclear families predominate in more than 75% of all foraging groups. The changing American family. American culture still generally extols the independent, nuclear, and neolocal family, although the diversity of American family structures is far from this ideal. This is a result of the high divorce rate, legal same-sex marriage, the increasing number of working mothers in single-parent households, and the growing number of unmarried couples living together in long-term relationships, surrogate reproduction, and of childless couples, the greater number of people who never marry, the increasing number of people who remarry after divorce or widowhood, and the increasing number of three-generation households. The high rates of divorce and remarriage enmesh nuclear families in larger and more complicated kinship networks. Sometimes called blended families, these networks include previously divorced spouses and their new marriage partners, sometimes children from previous marriages, or multiple sets of grandparents and other similar relations. Although blended families may function in some ways, like traditional two-parent families, in fact, only one child in 6 averages a weekly visit with a divorced father, and only 1 in 4 sees him once a month. Almost half of the children of divorced parents have not seen their biological fathers for more than a year, and more than 2/3 have lost contact with him 10 years later. Another change in the American family is the growing number of multi-generational families, which has increased substantially since 1970, caused both by the increase of immigrants who live in such families and the increase of the number of adult children moving back to their parents' home because they cannot find employment. At the same time, the number of Americans living alone is also rising, including young people, middle-aged people, and even the elderly. In 2009, single-parent households, mainly single-mother households, accounted for about 27% of all households with children, and 3.1 million American children lived with neither of their parents. One study estimates about half of the children in the United States will spend at least some of their childhood in a single-parent family, either as a result of divorce or separation or because their mothers never married. An important and increasing trend in the United States is children being born to unmarried mothers. Today that figure is over 40%, reaching to over 50% for children born to women under 30. This trend occurs in other wealthy countries as well. In Sweden, over 55% of births are to non-married mothers, and in France and the United Kingdom both have higher rates than the United States. In the past, children being born to unmarried mothers was associated with teenage pregnancies. Today, most unmarried mothers are between the ages of 20 and 30. Although rates of birth to unmarried mothers are up for all ethnic groups in the United States, they have risen particularly sharply among Hispanic and Black women. These groups account for the 53% and 73%, respectively, of all births to unmarried women. As a group, single-mother families are far poorer than other families. One exception to the trend of single motherhood is college graduates, for whom marriage makes more sense economically than it does for poor women whose mates are less likely to have well-paying jobs or even to be employed. Composite families. Composite compound families are aggregates of nuclear families linked by a common spouse, most often the husband. The typical composite family is a polygamist household consisting of one man with several wives and their respective children, each wife and their children normally occupying a separate residence. In composite families, the tie between a mother and her children is particularly strong. The dynamics of a composite family typically involves the interaction of the husband with several wives, interaction between co-wives, and competition among the children of different wives over inheritance and succession. Extended families. The extended family consists of two or more generations of male or female kin with their spouses and offspring, occupying a single household under the authority of a household head. An extended family is not just a collection of nuclear families in an extended family system. Lineal ties, the blood ties between generations, are more important than the ties of marriage. Extended families are particularly adaptive among cultivators as they provide more workers than nuclear families, which adaptive in both food production and the production of marketing of handicrafts. In peasant agricultural societies where land ownership is important for both prestige and power, the extended family helps keep land intact over generations rather than parceling it out into even smaller and more unproductive pieces among male descendants. Although the extended family is ideal in more than half of the world's societies, it is found most often among the landlord and prosperous merchant classes. The patrilineal extended family is organized around the male line, a man, his sons, and the sons' wives and children. Societies with patrilineal extended families also tend to have patrilineal residence rules. A matrilineal family is organized around the female line, a woman, her daughters, and the daughters' husbands and children. Matrilineal families may have matrilocal residence rules or avantilocal residence rules. Kinship systems. Relationships through blood and marriage. Kinship includes relationships described through the idiom of blood and relationships through marriage. Kinship determines the formation of societal groups, like families, is the basis for classification of people in relation to each other, structures individual rights and obligations, and regulates behavior. Because all of these elements in social life are intertwined, anthropologists refer to kinship as a system. Although a kinship system always rests on some kind of biological relationship, kinship systems are cultural phenomena, as indicated earlier by the differential classification of parallel and cross cousins. Kinship classification may or may not reflect a scientifically accurate assessment of biological ties. In small-scale, non-industrial societies, kinship is most important social bond. It is the basis of group formation, and norms of kinship govern the most important relationships, rights, and responsibilities between individuals and groups. The extension of kinship ties is the main way of linking groups to one another and incorporating strangers into a group. Even in modern industrialized societies, where citizenship is an important basis of rights and obligations, kinship has many important functions. It is the major context within which wealth is inherited. Kinship is important on many ritual occasions. There is a strong sentiment that blood is thicker than water. Kinship systems have several functions necessary to the continuation of a society. They provide continuity between generations and provide for the orderly transmission of property and social position between generations. Kinship systems define a universe of others on whom a person can depend on for aid. The adaptiveness of social groups larger than the nuclear family accounts for the fact that extended kin groups are found in so many human societies. Kinship systems grow out of a group's history as well as its relationship to the environment and its subsistence strategies. Once in place, however, kinship systems take on a life of their own. Although as economic and historical circumstances change, kinship ideologies may be manipulated and negotiated to fit the new realities. Rules of descent and the formation of descent groups. In anthropological terminology, descent is a culturally established affiliation with one or both parents. Descent is an important basis of social group formation in many societies. A descent group is a group of consanguineal or blood-related kin who are lineal descendants of a common ancestor extending beyond 2 generations. In non-industrial societies, descent groups organize domestic life, enculturate children, determine the use and transfer of property and political and ritual offices, carry out religious rituals, settle disputes, engage in warfare, and structure the use of political power. Unilineal descent. The rules for establishing descent may be unilineal or bilateral. Under unilineal descent, descent group membership is based on links through either the paternal line or the maternal line, but not both. Unilineal descent rules are either patrilineal, in which a person belongs to the descent group of the father, or matrilineal, in which the person belongs to the descent group of the mother. One important adaptive advantage of unilineal descent groups is that kin groups do not overlap, thus binding their members more tightly to one another. Also, unilineal descent rules provide a clearly defined group membership for everyone in the society. This allows people to more easily understand their rights of ownership, social duties, and social roles, and allows them to locate a larger number of known and unknown people in a society. Unilineal descent groups can perpetuate themselves over time, even though their membership changes. Like modern corporations, unilineal descent groups are permanent units that give an existence beyond the individuals who are members at any given time. Old members die and new ones are admitted through birth, but the integrity of the corporate group persists. Such groups can own property and manage resources, also like modern corporations. Types of unilineal descent groups: lineages and clans. A lineage is a kin group whose members can trace descent from a common ancestor and who can demonstrate those genealogical links among themselves. Patrilineages are lineages formed by the descent through the male line. Matrilineages are formed by descent through the female line. Lineages may vary in size, from 3 generations upward. Related lineages may form clans. The common clan ancestor may be a mythical figure. Sometimes no specific ancestor is known or named. Clans and lineages have different functions in different societies. The lineages is often a local, residential, or domestic group whose members cooperate on a daily basis. Clans are generally not residential units but tend to spread out over many villages. Therefore, clans often have political and religious functions rather than primarily domestic and economic ones. Clans are important in regulating marriage. In most societies, clans are exogamous, which strengthens their unilineal character. Exogamy is a rule specifying that a person must marry outside a particular group. If a person married within the clan, his or her children would find it difficult to make sharp distinctions between maternal and paternal relatives. This person would not know how to act towards others, and others would not know how to act toward him or her. Clan exogamy also extends the network of peaceful social relations within a society as different clans are allied through marriage. Patrilineal descent, the newer. In societies with patrilineal descent groups, both males and females among the descent group of the father's father, and so on. Thus a man, his sisters and brothers, his own children, his brother's children, and his son's children, all belong to the same descent group. Inheritance and succession to office move from father to son. Although the status of women varies in patrilineal systems in general, the husband is guaranteed rights and control over his wife or wives and children because the continuity of the descent group depends on this. Patrilineal systems most often has patrilocal rules of residence, so a wife may find herself living among strangers, which tends to undermine female solidarity and support. The Nuer and East African pastoral people are a patrilineal society. All rights, privileges, obligations, and interpersonal relationships are regulated by kinship. A man, his father, his brothers, and their children are considered the closest kin. Patrilineal membership confers rights to land, requires participation in certain religious ceremonies, and determines the political and judicial obligations, such as making alliances in feuds and warfare. Lineage membership may spread over several villages, helping to create alliances between members of otherwise independent villages that contain members of several different lineages. Each newer clan, which is viewed as being composed of related lineages, not individuals, is also spread over several villages. Because one's own lineage or clan and one's mother's lineage or clan are exogamous, kinship relations are widely extended throughout the tribe. The absence of a centralized system of political control, these kinship-based alliances are an important mechanism of governance. The Nuer believe that close kin should not fight with one another, so interlineage or interclan disputes are kept small and settled rapidly. But non-kin are perceived as potential enemies, so an attack by outsiders on one lineage segment may cause all clan members to join in warfare against a common enemy and their clan brothers. Matrilineal Descent, the Hopi. In matrilineal societies, the most important ties are between a woman, her mother, and her siblings. Because children belong to a mother's descent group, the membership of a matrilineal descent group consists of a woman, her brothers, her sisters, children, her own children, and the children of her daughters. In matrilineal societies, the rights and responsibilities of the father in a patrilineal society fall onto a woman's brother, not her husband. Marriage gives a man sexual and economic rights over his wife, but not rights over their children. After marriage, a man usually goes to live with or near his wife's kin. He thus is an outsider in his wife's household, while she is surrounded by her kin. Because a husband's role in a matrilineal society is less important than a patrilineal one, marriages in matrilineal societies tend to be less stable. In matrilineal societies, like the Hopi of the American Southwest, the rights and responsibilities vested in the male elders fall onto a woman's brother rather than her husband. This decreases conflict between fathers and sons, but also means that a man must pass on his knowledge, property, and offices to sons of his sister, not his own sons. This may engender conflicts between a man and his nephews, who are subject to his control. Thus, in a matrilineal system, a man's loyalties are split between his own sons and his sister's sons, a tension that does not occur in patrilineal systems. Among the Hopi, the strongest tie is between sisters, who with their mother form the foundation of a household group. If one sister dies, another sister looks after her children. Sisters cooperate in all domestic tasks, and few quarrels that arise are settled by the mother's brother or by their own brothers. Husbands are peripheral in the wife's household. Their mother's place is their home, to which they return for rituals and ceremonies upon separation or divorce. A son belongs to his mother's lineage, keeps his personal and ritual property in her home, consults his mother for all important decisions. A boy's relationship with his maternal uncle is characterized by reserve, respect, and even fear, while his relationship with his father is affectionate and involves little discipline. He has few ritual and economic obligations to his father's family, but engages in little direct cooperation and does not come under their authority. A Hopi man teaches his sons the subsistence tasks of farming and sheep herding, and sons support their father in his old age. A man's relationship with his daughter is affectionate but not close, and he has few specific duties regarding her upbringing. Hopi matrilineal clans extend over many villages. Both has his own clan, his father's clan, and his mother's father's clan are exogamous. Through matrilineal clan membership and through marriage, a Hopi man requires a large range of relatives, all whom are called by kinship terms. This relates a Hopi man to almost everyone in his village, in other villages, and to similar clans in Pueblo societies. Double descent. About 5% of the world's cultures practice double descent. In the system, a person belongs to both the patrilineal group of the father and the matrilineal group of the mother. However, these descent groups operate in different areas of life. Among the Yako in Nigeria, for example, rights to farmland, forest products, as well as some religious offices derive from membership in a patrilineal group, while matrilineal relationships govern the transfer of accumulated wealth, such as currency, livestock, tools, weapons, and household goods. Bilateral kinship systems. About 40% of the world's societies do not have lineages and are bilateral. In few cases, there are ambilateral. Under rules of bilateral descent, both maternal and paternal lines are used equally as a basis for reckoning descent and for establishing the rights and obligations of kinship. Bilateral systems do not have clear-cut descent groups. Rather, they have networks of kin, called kindreds, which are defined in only their relation to a particular individual. Except for brothers and sisters, every individual's kindred is unique. Kindreds are actually overlapping categories of kin rather than social groups, and thus are more difficult to organize as cooperative kin-based collectives. For example, because a kindred is not a group, it cannot own land or have continuity over time. American bilateral family. Bilateral kinship systems seem particularly adaptive in societies where mobility and independence are important. They are basic to Western culture, including the United States, and predominant among foraging societies as well. In some Pacific Island societies, the kinship system is ambilineal. Individuals may choose to affiliate with either their mother or their father's descent group, but not simultaneously with both. Upon marriage, the new couple can live with either spouse's descent group, a decision most often based on access to land, although friendship and politics may also play a role. The classification of kin. In all societies, kin are referred to by special terms. The total system of kinship terms and the rules for using these terms make up kinship classification systems. Every kinship classification system groups some relatives together and differentiates them from other relatives. Some kinship systems have only a small number of kinship terms, whereas others have a different term for almost every relative. The classification of kin is related to the roles they play in society. In the kinship diagram, ego is the person from whose perspective the chart is drawn and viewed. If, for example, ego refers to his father and his father's brothers by the same term, his relationship with them tends to be similar. By the same token, if ego's father and his father's brothers are referred to by different terms, it is expected that ego will act differently towards each of them and that they will act differently towards him. These ideals are modified by relationships and personalities of particular individuals. Kinship classification is one of the most important regulators of behavior in most societies. It defines how each person must act towards others and how others must act toward him or her. Kinship classification systems are related to other aspects of culture, such as the types of social groups that are formed in the systems of marriage and inheritance. Understanding the variety of kinship systems makes the crucial anthropological point that although each society considers its own kinship classification system natural and normal, the logic underlying all kinship systems is cultural, not biological. For example, in the United States, the brothers and sisters of one parent and their spouses are called aunt and uncle, and the children of these relatives are called cousins. Have you ever asked yourself why the term is used for the mother's sister, a relative by blood, and the mother's brother's wife, a relative by marriage? or why there are no separate terms for male and female cousins, but gender does differentiate nieces from nephews. Principles for classification of kin. Societies use a combination of some, but not all, of 7 important principles of kinship classification in their kinship terminology. Generation, which distinguishes ascending and descending generations from ego. Relative age, where seniority counts, for example, in distinguishing an older from a younger brother. Lineality versus collaterally, where lineal kin are related in a single line, such as grandfather, father, son, whereas collateral kin are descended from a common ancestor with ego, but are not ego's direct descendants or ascendants, for example, siblings or cousins. Gender, which differentiates relatives according to whether they are male or female. Consanguineal versus affinal kin, which differentiates relatives by blood in contrast to relatives by marriage, whereas the principle of sex-linking relative operates, for example, to differentiate cross-cousins from parallel cousins, and bifurcation, which distinguishes relatives from the mother's side of the family from those of the father's side and is used by societies that distinguish the mother's brother from the father's brother. These 7 principles combine in different ways to form different types of kinship systems. In making sense out of kinship systems, anthropologists attempt to understand the relationship of terminologies, rules of descent, and kinship groups to the ecological, economic, and political conditions under which different kinship systems emerge.